While all children and adults can seem particular about their likes and dislikes, people with sensory processing disorder will be so affected by their sensory preferences that it actually interferes with their normal everyday functioning. Clinical psychologist Dr. Tim Hope joins us this morning to share more about this disorder. Welcome back, Dr. Hope.
Morning.
Now, this is something that people may have not heard before, also known as SPD, sensory processing disorder. Tell us what it is.
Sure. So what we have is, we're human beings, we have senses, right? 5 senses: see, hear, smell, touch, taste. Some of us, though, have, because of the way our nerves are wired together, the way our brains are wired, we're just oversensitive in one or some of those areas of sensory. And so when they get extraordinarily oversensitive, and when those senses get jumbled in our brains, it really can be very overwhelming and overstimulating for us. And that can lead to dysfunction.
Now, who does it most commonly affect?
Well, we don't understand very well which particular person will develop sensory processing disorder, but we know that it is more common in certain psychiatric conditions like high-functioning autism or Asperger's disorder or autism, or some kids with ADHD can often have this, but it doesn't have to be a part of that condition. There are plenty of children out there who have an overstimulation effect and even a sensory processing disorder without those other conditions.
Okay, so I'm sure it's tricky to diagnose exactly what it is that's affecting them based on their symptoms. Now, is this something that is caused by the environment? Is it genetic? Or is there evidence of exactly what causes it?
So what we think is that this is a neurological condition. Probably it's going to be both genetics and the environment that have an interplay, but we know that it can run in families. We know that it can pop up unannounced in a particular child in a family, so we think there might be some hereditary causes, but this is not something that a parent can create in their child. This is not something that you're going to cause in your child. So you should not feel badly about that if your child does happen to have some sensory sensitivities or even the sensory processing disorder.
I think it is natural for parents to automatically feel guilty. What could I have done differently? How could I have changed?
Yeah.
But it is something that you can't necessarily change. You can just make it better.
Right.
And we'll talk about treatment in just a bit. Let's talk about examples, some specific examples of where children may actually be experiencing this hypersensitivity or oversensitivity.
Right. So these are the children who cannot tolerate the seams in their clothing. So I'm really happy that they no longer make socks with a seam around the toes, because that was really one of the most common triggers for kids. Or the tags in the backs of shirts or the underwear. Or certain smells. So you'll see in a number of school environments that they're banning scented deodorants or perfumes or hair products because that will trigger either allergic reactions in kids, or even more commonly are these hypersensitivities to the sense of smell. So it really can be a texture. A certain kind of texture will result in a child really rejecting a particular group of foods, or the tastes. It really can go in any of those sensory areas.
But it is oversensitivity.
It
a
is.
lot of us, I mean, tags drive me crazy in certain
That's
things,
right.
but it's when it's oversensitivity and when it actually affects your normal everyday functioning.
That's
so
right.
much to the point that it's a disorder.
So we'll see children who are so overstimulated by sounds that they'll refuse to go to a birthday party because it's just too much noise for them. And they have to cover their ears and they're gone. They do not want to be anywhere near that. That's interfering with a child's daily life, with a child's daily functioning.
And no child should have to feel that they don't want to go to a kid's birthday party.
Right.
So there are ways that parents can take care of it and make sure that they are not being affected negatively by this disorder. And we'll talk about that in just a bit. But first, it's not just children, though it's most common to be to have children be affected, but also adults can be affected as well.
Right. We've really gained a lot more understanding about this through a number of researchers who are doing some work on trying to understand what is it, how common is it, how do we formally diagnose it. And there was a book that came out called The Out of Sync Child that's sort of considered the Bible of this area, but this is really relatively recent. And so what's happening is a lot of adults who, as parents are having children with these sensitivities, are now looking at themselves and saying, oh, geez, I really have a number of these conditions too. I really avoid these certain circumstances. I avoid these types of experiences because I know I get overwhelmed by it. And so they're now diagnosing themselves with SPD too.
So we'll talk more about what you can do if you think your son or daughter may be affected by this disorder, what you can do for treatment, and how there definitely is help out there. Thanks so much, Dr.
Sure,
Hope.
you're welcome.
We are back with clinical psychologist Dr. Tim Hope. We're talking about sensory processing disorder. Now, you explained exactly what it is earlier in the show. Now we're talking about treatment. But first, if a mom, dad, grandparent is watching, they think my son or daughter or granddaughter, grandchild has this, what should they do?
Well, first, be reassured you're not alone. A lot of parents are wondering, geez, is this unique? Is this something that's particular to my child? You are not alone. This is unfortunately not that uncommon. There are plenty of other kids who have these kinds of conditions. There are plenty of adults who are living with this condition. So you're not alone. Reach out, get some resources, talk with other parents who might be experiencing this, and you can get some support that way. So that's important. The second thing that you can do is talk to your doctor. Talk to your child's teacher at school. Talk to the school psychologist at school. They often will have occupational therapists there at the school who can do these kinds of occupational therapy evaluations, where they'll do a sensory evaluation for your child. In talking to your doctor, you might go to an outpatient occupational therapy practice and also get a sensory evaluation, which can give you an idea of, on the broad range of responses to these different sensory stimuli, where does your child fall? Is it something that's extreme and might need treatment, or is this something more in the normal range but just reflects particular preferences that you might have?
Let's talk about treatment.
Yeah.
Occupational therapy, this is how it's treated, how this disorder, or it's how a child learns the ability to cope with this disorder throughout their life. That's right. What is the therapy like?
So an occupational therapist, their main job is to try and help you be functional in your environment, in your world. So for children, children's worlds are home, friends, and school. Those are the primary areas that they're going to be involved in. So the occupational therapist can help that child be more functional by, based on that sensory evaluation, creating a sensory diet. So what stimuli are pleasant for you, what stimuli are neutral for you, what stimuli are noxious for you. And then looking at your world, where are the environments that you go into, where are you going to be exposed to those particular stimuli. And if you want to be able to go to birthday parties, how are you going to be able to cope with louder sounds, if sounds are one of those stimuli that can be overwhelming for you. And then we create a diet, a gradual exposure to increasingly intense versions of this particular stimuli, so that you can learn to cope, that you're going to learn to be okay, that you can learn to be functional in those environments despite exposure to those stimuli.
And how long roughly does therapy like this take? Of course, it's not their entire life that they have to attend, but this is definitely, like you said, gradual.
Right, so this is one of those, it really depends on how many stimuli are difficult for you, how many areas of the different senses are difficult for you. And so it really can depend on if it's a relatively small problem. It could be a relatively shorter course of therapy. If it's a more pervasive problem, it might be a little bit longer course of therapy. But what we're talking about here is really giving the child and the family the tools that they need to be able to identify the challenges and then the coping strategies that they need, so that they can practice these skills for the rest of their lives. Because this is not something that will necessarily be cured. It is something that you learn to cope with and be functional with.
Dr. Hope, it's always great to have you here. Thank you for educating our viewers on exactly what sensory processing disorder is, and now we know exactly what we can do to help our child. Now, for more information, you can visit us online at mymassappeal.com later today.